Have you ever noticed how the Western approach to breaking bad habits is inherently violent? We speak of killing bad habits, crushing our weaknesses, fighting our urges, battling our demons. The language itself reveals a fundamental misconception that the path to transformation requires internal warfare. We set ambitious goals, attempt radical changes, muster enormous willpower, and then inevitably fail. The cycle repeats, each collapse reinforcing our sense of inadequacy, each new attempt requiring even greater force of will to overcome not just the habit itself, but our growing self-doubt. I remember speaking with a woman who had attempted to quit smoking 17 times. 17 brave beginnings, 17 painful defeats. Each time she would gather her resolve, announce to friends and family, "This is it," throw away her cigarettes in a dramatic gesture, and for a few days or weeks, she would white-knuckle her way through cravings. And then, inevitably, in a moment of stress or weakness, she would smoke one cigarette, just one. But that single cigarette wasn't merely a small setback. In her mind, it was complete failure. The shame of that failure would trigger a full return to her previous pattern, often smoking even more than before. When she finally came to me, her voice breaking with desperation, she asked, "What's wrong with me? Why am I so weak? Why can't I change?" But she had been asking the wrong questions all along. There was nothing wrong with her willpower. The problem was in her approach, the Western approach, to transformation. What if I told you that there exists an ancient Japanese method, so powerful, yet so gentle, that it can dissolve even the most stubborn habits without struggle, without pain, and without the need for superhuman willpower? This isn't a magical quick fix, but rather a profound shift in how we understand the very nature of change itself. This method has transformed millions of lives across centuries, yet remains largely unknown in our culture of dramatic makeovers and overnight success stories. It's called Kaizen, the way of good change, and it completely reverses our understanding of how to break free from self-destructive patterns. In the West, we've been conditioned to believe that meaningful change requires dramatic action. Go big or go home. No pain, no gain. These mantras have been hammered into us since childhood. But the Japanese approach to transformation is fundamentally different, rooted in an understanding of how our minds actually work, not how we wish they worked. Kaizen is built on a simple but profound insight. The human brain instinctively resists dramatic change. When we attempt to transform ourselves radically and suddenly, we trigger a primitive fear response deep in our amygdala, what neuroscientists call the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. This response shuts down precisely the parts of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that we need for creative thinking, planning, and maintaining new behaviors. In other words, the harder we push for dramatic change, the more powerfully our brain pushes back. This understanding of the brain's resistance to change was embodied perfectly by a Japanese master who lived nearly 400 years ago, Miyamoto Musashi. While remembered primarily as history's greatest swordsman, Musashi was also a profound philosopher whose insights cut to the heart of human transformation. In his final work, the Dokodo, or The Way of Walking Alone, written just days before his death, he offered 21 precepts for living. Among them was this gem of wisdom: do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise. Seek what they sought. What was Musashi telling us? That true transformation doesn't come from imitating external behaviors, but from understanding the inner principles that generate those behaviors. Applied to breaking habits, this means that rather than focusing on the dramatic external actions we associate with change, the warrior's approach of battling our habits, we should seek the underlying principle, the brain's natural way of evolving and growing. This is where Kaizen reveals its quiet power. The word combines two Japanese concepts, Kai, meaning change, and Zen, meaning good or wisdom. At its core, Kaizen is the practice of continuous improvement through small, steady steps, so small, in fact, that they bypass the brain's fear response entirely. Rather than triggering resistance, these tiny steps gently expand your comfort zone from within. They're so minimal that your brain doesn't even register them as change, and therefore doesn't activate its defensive mechanisms. It's like boiling a frog slowly. Except in this case, it's your bad habits that get cooked, not you. I want to pause for a moment and ask something I've been contemplating deeply. When did you first notice the exhaustion that comes from treating self-improvement as a battle? That moment when, despite all your determination and declarations, you realized that the constant internal warfare was creating a deep fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to cure. I receive messages from people who have spent years trying to overcome habits through sheer force of will. They've built impressive facades of temporary control through superhuman effort, but inside, they feel fragmented, divided, perpetually at war with themselves. The most painful part is that many believe this internal struggle is what change is supposed to feel like, that the exhaustion they experience is simply the price of transformation. If something in this resonates with your experience, share in the comments. My understanding of changing habits began to shift when I realized that your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to question their own approach to DOMS. Transformation. Each honest comment becomes a doorway for others to step through. Now, let's explore how the Japanese method of Kaizen can dissolve even your most stubborn habits without willpower or struggle. The first principle of Kaizen for breaking bad habits is what I call the art of the minimum. Instead of asking, "What's the most I can possibly do?" you ask, "What's the least I can possibly do? What's the smallest step that doesn't trigger resistance?" For the woman who wanted to quit smoking, I suggested something that seemed ridiculous at first. She would continue smoking exactly as before, but with one tiny change. She would place her cigarette 6 feet further away from her usual spot. That's it. No dramatic declarations, no willpower required, no feeling of deprivation or struggle, just a 6-foot difference. "That's absurd," she said. "How will that possibly help?" "Just try it," I responded. For 1 week, the beauty of this minimum step was that it required almost no willpower to implement. It was too small to trigger her brain's resistance. Yet this tiny change accomplished something crucial. It interrupted the automatic nature of her habit. Now, instead of reaching for a cigarette unconsciously, she had to stand up, walk across the room, and consciously decide to smoke. This small interruption created a moment of awareness, a tiny gap between stimulus and response, where choice could begin to enter. After a week, when this small change had become comfortable, we added another minimal step. Before lighting each cigarette, she would take 3 deep breaths. Again, she was free to smoke as much as she wanted. The goal wasn't to reduce smoking through force of will, it was simply to bring more awareness into the process, to transform an unconscious habit into a conscious choice. Within a month, through a series of these tiny changes, each so small that it required virtually no willpower, her smoking had naturally decreased by half, not because she was forcing herself to smoke less, but because the automatic grip of the habit had been gently loosened. This illustrates the second principle of Kaizen for breaking bad habits: awareness before action. Most Western approaches to changing habits focus immediately on changing behaviors, the external manifestation of the habit. But Kaizen recognizes that sustainable change begins with awareness, the internal relationship to the habit. Before you can effectively change a behavior, you must first understand it. Not intellectually, but experientially. You must become intimately familiar with the triggers, the sensations, the thought patterns, and the rewards that sustain the habit. This principle is expressed beautifully in another of Musashi's precepts: perceive that which cannot be seen with the eye. Bad habits persist, largely because they operate below the threshold of consciousness. We reach for the cookie, check social media, or snap at our loved ones before we're even aware of what we're doing. By bringing gentle, non-judgmental awareness to these automatic behaviors, we begin to see the invisible machinery that powers them. And what we can see clearly, we can change effortlessly. The third principle of Kaizen for breaking habits is ask small questions. Big, dramatic questions like, how can I completely transform my life? Or how can I overcome this addiction once and for all? Overwhelm the brain and trigger resistance. Small questions, on the other hand, bypass this resistance and engage the creative, problem-solving parts of our mind. Questions like, what's one tiny adjustment I could make to my environment that would make this habit slightly more difficult? Or what's one small way I could make the alternative behavior slightly more attractive? These small questions activate what neuroscientists call solution-focused thinking rather than problem-focused thinking. When we're problem-focused, we dwell on what's wrong, what needs to be fixed. what's broken about us. This actually reinforces neural pathways associated with the problem, but when we ask small, solution-focused questions, we activate entirely different neural networks, those associated with creativity, possibility, and growth. The brain literally begins to rewire itself in response to these questions, creating new neural pathways that gradually replace the old habit circuits. This leads us to the fourth principle of Kaizen for breaking habits. Think small thoughts. Our thoughts create our reality in a very literal, neurological sense. Each thought reinforces specific neural pathways. When we repeatedly think, "I'm addicted," "I'm weak," "I can't control myself," we strengthen the very neural circuits that maintain these conditions. Kaizen invites us to consciously plant small, positive thoughts that, over time, will grow into new neural forests. For the woman trying to quit smoking, I suggested she spend just 10 seconds each morning thinking, "I'm curious about my relationship with smoking," not "I need to quit," or "smoking is killing me," or any other thought that would trigger resistance. Just simple curiosity. This tiny thought, repeated daily, began to change how she related to her habit, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a pattern to be understood. The fifth principle of Kaizen for breaking habits is take small actions. This is where the Western and Japanese approaches diverge most dramatically. We're conditioned to believe that meaningful change requires dramatic action, but Kaizen recognizes that tiny, consistent actions have exponentially greater power than occasional heroic efforts. This is because small actions, done consistently, literally rewire the brain through what neuroscientists call self-directed neuroplasticity. Every time we take even a tiny action that contradicts an old habit, we create new neural pathways. Each repetition strengthens these pathways until eventually they become the path of least resistance, the new default. For someone trying to break a social media addiction, a small action might be place your phone face down for 1 minute at the beginning of each day. Not deleting all your apps, not locking your phone away, not setting ambitious usage limits that will be abandoned in days. Just 1 minute, face down. Once that becomes comfortable, and only then, extend it to 2 minutes. The key is that each step must be small enough that it doesn't trigger resistance, yet consistent enough to gradually establish new neural patterns. This approach might seem excruciatingly slow to our Western sensibilities. We want transformation now, not in months or years. But consider this paradox. The slower path is actually the faster one. When we attempt dramatic changes, we almost inevitably fail and end up back where we started, or worse, even more entrenched in our habits due to the backlash effect. But with Kaizen, even though each step is tiny, there is no backsliding. Each small advance becomes permanent, creating a foundation for the next advance. Like compound interest, these small changes result in exponential growth over time. The sixth and final principle of Kaizen for breaking habits is solve small problems. Rather than trying to overcome an entire bad habit at once, focus on identifying and addressing the smallest problems that contribute to it. For instance, if you're trying to break a habit of late-night snacking, you might notice that it always begins when you sit on a particular couch with your phone. The small problem isn't your willpower or your relationship with food, it's the specific environmental trigger of that couch-phone combination. By solving just this small problem, perhaps by sitting in a different spot or keeping your phone in another room during that time, you create a ripple effect that begins to disrupt the entire habit pattern. This approach is far more effective than generic strategies like try harder or be more disciplined. It recognizes that habits are complex systems with multiple components and that changing just one small component can cause the entire system to reorganize. These 6 principles of Kaizen, the art of the minimum, awareness before action, asking small questions, thinking small thoughts, taking small actions, and solving small problems, form a comprehensive methodology for dissolving even the most stubborn habits without willpower or struggle. But there's one final element that makes this approach uniquely powerful: self-compassion. In the Western approach to breaking habits, failure is seen as a moral weakness. When we slip up, we berate ourselves, feel ashamed, and often abandon our efforts entirely. The "what the hell" effect that researchers have documented. where one small deviation leads to complete abandonment of our goals. But in the Japanese approach, there is no concept of failure, only feedback. Every setback is valuable information, a chance to refine our understanding and adjust our approach. This compassionate stance isn't just psychologically healthier, it's neurologically optimal. Research has shown that self-criticism activates the brain's threat response, shutting down learning and creativity. Self-compassion, on the other hand, activates the mammalian caregiving system, releasing oxytocin and other neurochemicals that enhance learning, memory, and behavioral flexibility. Exactly what we need to change stubborn habits. So as you begin to apply these principles of Kaizen to your own habits, remember to be gentle with yourself. The path is not a straight line but a spiral, gradually moving upward even as it seems to circle back upon itself at times. Each apparent setback is actually an opportunity to deepen your understanding and refine your approach. This isn't positive thinking, it's neurological reality. The brain learns best in an atmosphere of relaxed concentration, not anxious striving. The woman who had tried to quit smoking 17 times? Using these principles of Kaizen, she gradually, gently freed herself from her addiction, not through dramatic declarations or heroic willpower, but through tiny steps that bypassed her resistance entirely. Within 6 months, she was smoke-free, and remarkably, it felt effortless, not because the approach was easy, but because it worked with her brain's natural learning mechanisms rather than against them. This is the Japanese way of breaking habits, not through force, but through understanding, not through struggle, but through harmony with our own nature. It recognizes that true change comes not from battling ourselves, but from growing ourselves through small, consistent steps that honor the brain's inherent resistance to sudden change. As Musashi wrote in his final days, "Do nothing which is of no use." The Western approach to breaking habits, dramatic declarations, heroic efforts, inevitable backsliding, is ultimately of no use. It doesn't produce lasting change. The Japanese approach of Kaizen, small, consistent steps that bypass resistance, may seem less exciting, less dramatic, but it works. And in the end, that's all that matters. If these reflections on the Japanese method of breaking habits have touched something deep within you, something that perhaps you've sensed but haven't been able to articulate, know that it's not by chance that you've encountered these words today. This channel exists as a space where we can question our most fundamental assumptions about transformation, not to arrive at comfortable answers, but to penetrate to the truth that lies beyond comfort. By subscribing, you're not just receiving content, you're joining a community of fellow explorers who are willing to look beyond conventional understanding to discover what it means to live with freedom from destructive patterns. I don't offer quick fixes or habit hacks, but an invitation to a deeper understanding of your own nature and how change actually happens. If this journey of exploration calls to you, activate the bell and join us as we continue to explore wisdom that has transformed countless lives over centuries. Your presence here matters, whether you subscribe or not. But if you choose to walk this path with us, each new video becomes an opportunity to deepen your understanding and freedom.